It's March the 1st. The Irish Readathon is officially underway. And this month, as something new, I'm going to try and wrap up my month as a kind of a monthly vlog in the style of Victoria from What Victoria Read. So, while I put my face cream on this morning, I'm going to tell you what I started reading last night. I have to do it with like 2 fingers on my right hand because my middle finger is a little bit out of business at the moment. But last night I started reading the first maybe 50 to 60 pages of, let me see if I can pick it up, of Aisling in the City by Sarah Breen and Emer McLysaght. It's the 4th book of the Aisling series. It came out last October, but I knew I wanted to keep it for the Irish Readathon because one of the prompts is always read a book with a green cover, and it's not all green, but it has got green on the cover anyway. So, as far as I've read, I can see you now. So as far as I've read, Aisling has just gotten to New York. She's been given a job as a kind of event planner, event manager over in New York, and she's gotten a visa to do all of that. She's been on business class in the plane, which is something that she has absolutely milked for its life. I love the Aisling books, but they are very of their place. I wouldn't say they're of their time, they're of their place. It's a thing where if you're not Irish yourself, there's going to be some parts of it that you're kind of struggling to understand, that you're not going to really know what's happening in them. But I am about 60 pages into this and I am absolutely loving it so far. I have a little bit of a dilemma as to where I'm going to read a book as an audiobook or as a physical book. So I have a copy of Homestretch by Graham Norton on my shelf. I bought it in, I think, August of last year, I believe, just before I came to Berlin. I have no idea whether to read this as a physical book or as an audiobook. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen to the first chapter of the audiobook and see how it reads as an audiobook. If it's reading really well as an audiobook and if it's keeping me gripped, because I know that Graham Norton is a really good writer. I've already read A Keeper by him and I have a copy of Holding that I would love to reread. If the audiobook is keeping me, I will keep going with it as an audiobook, and if it's losing me, I'm going to switch over to the physical book after I finish with Aisling. The audiobook really worked for me. It's later on the same day, it's later on the 1st of March, and I finished the audiobook for Homestretch. I didn't even stop to think about that. It read really well as an audiobook. Graham narrates it himself, which really kind of brings another edge to the story. I really like it when authors narrate their own audiobooks because they have the innate ability to tell their own stories. So they have the biggest connection with the stories that they're telling and the words that are written down on the page. The book narrative starts in 1987, and the night before a wedding in a small town in Ireland, there is a car crash where 3 of the occupants of the car are killed and 3 of them survive. And one of the occupants is Connor, and he is kind of ostracized from the whole community because of his involvement in this car accident. He then heads off to Liverpool and kind of figures out his sexuality while he's there. Then he heads to New York. And then there's a whole kind of narrative that really spiderwebs out from there. I've talked a little bit more about this in the Books and Brews that came up. I won't have filmed it by now, but you will be able to see it already. And I'm going to go into a lot more depth of what I felt about this book, but I genuinely, absolutely adored this. I knew that Graham was a really good writer because I've already read A Keeper, and I read that also in one day. So I think I knew I was going to get through this one in just one day as well, but go buy this book. It's the 4th of March, and my finger is still pretty gammy, but I have also got gin, so who's winning here? It's also Graham Norton gin, which felt really appropriate for this moment. As you can see from just that clip there, I started The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue today on audiobook, and that was a book that was actually on my TBR from the month already. I felt like I had to give The Pull of the Stars a couple of months, couple of years to actually pick it up, because it is set in the middle of the flu pandemic from 1918, the Spanish flu pandemic, just after the end of World War One. And I just needed a little bit of time to not be living through another pandemic before picking up a book that was featured around a pandemic. So while you've got all of that flu pandemic stuff, this is actually set in a maternity hospital in Dublin, and it's just after the Easter Rising of 1916. It's just coming up to the Armistice Day in November 1918. It's a very different Ireland to the one that I would have grown up in. And it was really great to see what the differences were, not just in everyday life, but in people's opinions. And also how, I don't want to say primitive, but not quite as advanced medical procedures and medical opinions are compared to as they are today. The book follows Julia, who is a maternity nurse in a maternity hospital in Dublin. As you can imagine, during this flu pandemic and during World War One, the numbers in the wards are starting to climb and climb and climb. And this is also a time where women didn't just have 2-3 kids and stopped. Back then, it wasn't uncommon for families to have 10, 15 children. So these would be women who usually would have had quite a lot of children already at home. There were very few, I think maybe 1 or 2 women in the book who were having their first ever baby. As you can imagine, Julia is stretched pretty thin at the moment. So there is a helper came in called Bridie, who doesn't really have a lot of medical experience. I think she is just a lay person that they bring in. She gets to work pretty soon, and then there is a doctor who comes down from some other hospital in Dublin. Her name is Kathleen Lynn, and it turns out that she is a rebel on the Sinn Féin side who has been taken away and put in jail because of her involvement, not directly, but on the side of the Easter Rising in 1916. And this character, Kathleen Lynn, is actually a real person, and the real life Kathleen Lynn was also a rebel on the Sinn Féin side, was also somewhat involved in the Easter Rising of 1916, and was good friends with Constance Markievicz, one of the rebels who also took part in the 1916 Rising, and her life was spared because it was seen that it would be improper to execute a woman. And she went on in 1921, I believe, to be the first woman ever elected into Westminster, and she was also the first woman elected into the Irish Parliament. I think a lot of people will know that there is a sapphic romance in this book, and I felt like it just appeared out of nowhere. There was nothing really between these two characters that made me seem like there was going to be a romance between the two of them. I never really got any kind of vibes until it just happened one day that they kissed each other. And I think I would have liked to see that a little bit more developed into the book. I would have liked to see it kind of grown a little bit more. The book does really only span about 3 days at the end of October, start of November 1918. And I feel like there was a little bit more that you could have done with the romance that was in this book, with the time frame that was in this book. I think it was just lacking a little bit of that. But that's really my only gripe with this book. I genuinely really loved the portrayal of maternity hospitals back in the 1920s. I don't want to say that I loved reading about the struggles that these women would have had if they were infected with the influenza and also in labour bringing a child into the world, both of which are very difficult to gather on their own, and then you put them together and it's just chaos. But the book is beautifully written. I think this is my third of Emma's books and I absolutely loved it. So I'm definitely going to go and have a look at some of her other books. I know that Frog Music and Akin are both on my libraries app and I'm going to absolutely check those one out. As for New York's Newest Resident, I'm about 200 pages into the Aisling book. As you may have seen in the clips just there, I went into the office to work yesterday and forgot to bring my book with me, so I had nothing to read on the commute there and home. But I have made up for it in my lunch break today, and just after work today I got another couple, maybe 50-60 pages read of this book, and I am absolutely loving it. I think I'm going to punch on with it for the rest of the evening and really give this a go. I'm about halfway through pretty much, so I think if I really put my mind to it, I could have this finished either late tonight or early tomorrow morning. It is the 6th of March, it's a Sunday, and I have taken myself out on a little brunch date, and I brought Aisling with me, and we're done. I think I'm going to give this one 4 stars. There was a kind of storyline that popped up about 60% of the book through and kept going for the entire book that I don't think I liked. It was kind of like a nod to COVID without calling it COVID. But overall, I really enjoyed the book. So it was following Aisling, who has moved to New York and is working as an event coordinator for a kind of a really big events company in New York. And one of their big things is the political campaign for a local politician who is kind of running for the New York City offices or something like that. I really liked watching all of that develop, especially because there was a kind of an office hate to friendship that developed throughout the book. There's also a slight romance inside the book that I really liked watching, and it was also just really great to see Aisling kind of getting to terms with her life in New York, kind of settling into the city a little bit more. I have a feeling that there is something that the book is kind of setting up to be endgame, and I don't know how I feel about that at the moment. I'm kind of feeling like it's a step backwards for Aisling, but possibly with the 5th book coming out either next year, I believe, maybe my thoughts will have changed. Now that Aisling is finished, I am going to start on To Idle by Louise O'Neill. I'm going to be buddy reading this with my friend Michelle from Michelle's library. And we're not kind of setting okay, you have to read 3 chapters on this day and 3 chapters the next day. It's kind of a take it at your own pace kind of a situation. The book is about an influencer called Samantha who is writing her kind of a memoir to kind of celebrate hitting 3 million followers on Instagram. And she tells the story of her sexual awakening and one of her first experiences. The friend who is involved in this experience comes out to say that this isn't how she remembers it having happened, and that her memory of the situation is not as consensual and as loving as Samantha is remembering it. Louise is one of my favourite Irish authors. I've loved everything that she has written so far, and I'm really hoping that I get on well with this one too. I thought this was meant to stop when you hit 30. Apparently, no. Hey, hello, hi. It's finally Friday. It is the 11th of March. I was in the office again yesterday. I try and go in about once a week now that we're kind of starting to reopen the office. You don't need to have as many tests and checks as you're going in as you had before. And while I was there, I finished Milkman. And this is my first of the month because I don't think I enjoyed this one as much as other people that I've heard. I've heard Ross from the Royal Bookshelf absolutely adored this, but I did not get the same thing out of it. The book is set in Northern Ireland in the 1970s, so really at the height of the Troubles, and that really does give it a whole kind of tense atmosphere throughout the whole book, and that carries right from page 1 to page 300 and whatever. Something that really didn't connect me to this book at all is that none of the characters are named. I knew that the town they were living in, wherever it was, wouldn't have been named, and I have a feeling that somebody online said that it was Belfast. That could be correct, it could be incorrect, so don't quote me on that, but I didn't know that any of the characters wouldn't be named. I'm a hugely character-driven reader, so not knowing who these people were didn't connect me to the story, but I do understand why it was done, because back in the 1970s in Belfast, back in the 1970s in Northern Ireland, you needed to be more secretive when you were going about your daily life. You needed to kind of carry yourself under a bit of a veil of anonymity because there was so much turmoil and upheaval around you. Reading a book where I didn't particularly know who each character was, where it took me a while to understand who this person was, what this person was doing, how they were connected to the main character, who also, by the way, did not get a name, it just took me out of it a little bit. In fact, there was quite a lot of the book where I thought that the milkman and maybe boyfriend were the same person, and they absolutely weren't. It's just that because everything was done under that cloak of anonymity, it took me a little while to get into the grip of the story. But by then I think it was a little bit too late for me to give it anything more than a 3-star rating. It is almost 10 o'clock on a Friday evening, and I am getting ready to go to bed because I live a vicarious lifestyle and I have big plans tomorrow. But before I do go to bed, A, we're going to put on our face cream, and B, we're going to tell you about the book that I just finished, which is Idol by Louise O'Neill. The book follows Samantha, who is nearly 40 and is a content creator, influencer, that kind of like Instagram blogger basically. Her Instagram has just hit 3 million followers, and she's also just released a book. She's also just released a book called Chaste, where she talks about having been celibate for the last 2 years. But she's also written an essay in an essay collection called Blackout. And in this, she describes one of her earliest sexual experiences with a friend of hers. Then the friend has seen this, and after Samantha comes off the stage, having talked at like a vlogger con kind of thing, her manager comes over and tells her that this friend has sent an email to say that what was said in this Blackout essay is false. That the event that Samantha was talking about was actually a lot less consensual than the friend remembers it, and that their situations and their memories of this night wildly differ. I am continuously blown away by Louise O'Neill's writing. I think she's one of our best writers at the moment, and the way that she writes such unlikable characters can't be beaten, in my opinion. And you go throughout this book having absolutely no love for Samantha, but you are so gripped and you just want to find out what's happening and get to the bottom of everything. I will say there is an awful lot of twists. There's an awful lot of things that kind of come out of the woodwork as you're going through this book. I felt like I had figured out what was happening about 50 to 60% in, and then kept reading, and it turns out everything I had thought, flip it on its head, 100%. I was wrong. I will say something I did not love about this book is that Samantha reads a lot younger than she actually is. So she is 40 or approaching 40, but she actually reads a lot more like a, I would say, late 20s to early 30s kind of person. Somebody who's really concerned with what other people think of them, is really concerned with how other people perceive them. And I have a feeling that a lot of that might be because she is an influencer. That should be her whole life is lived on social media. So having these people's opinions of her is basically her bread and butter. Didn't love that. So now that I've got Idol finished, I'm going to go on to The Letter Home which is written by Rachel English, who is a broadcast journalist living and working in Dublin, and this is her 6th book, I'm almost certain. Half of it is written about somebody in modern day Dublin, half of it is written about somebody from the famine who moved over to the US in the times of the famine, so we're talking the 1840s. I love a book that's set in the famine. I was a little bit high-key obsessed with the famine when I was in school, so I am really hoping that I'm going to enjoy this one. I also feel it's very important to tell you that even though I will not be wearing my jumper for much longer as I'm getting into my pajamas, the book matches my jumper. I feel like already that's a good omen. This book, this exact copy, was actually sent to me by Rachel. That is not going to impact my thoughts on the book. It is not going to impact what I tell you about this book. I am going to be very fair, but very honest. It's the 15th of March, so bang on the halfway point of the month, and I completely forgot to tell you about a book that I finished yesterday. The group book for the Irish Readathon was Boys Don't Cry by Fiona Scarlett. I listened to the entire audiobook over Sunday and yesterday. This is a book that will absolutely rip your heart into pieces. You're following the story of Joe and Finn, who are brothers, and they're living in inner city Dublin. Joe is 17 and Finn is 12. Joe is an aspiring artist, he's really talented, and he is offered a prestigious scholarship at a school to go and kind of hone his craft. He's also aware that he comes from quite an unsteady background. He comes from an area where a lot of people will immediately preconceive him as a druggie, as bad news. Whereas on the other hand, Finn, throughout the book, is diagnosed with a type of blood cancer, and you're also going through how that diagnosis has affected himself, has affected his family, has affected his parents. This book felt really Dublin without leaning into Dublin stereotypes. I felt like I was walking along Dollymount Strand with the two brothers as they were walking along it eating 99s, which I can't wait to get back to Ireland and have a 99, but it felt like I was walking along the Strand and having one with them. Also, at times, utterly heartbreaking for so many reasons. There are some really profound and some really poignant moments throughout the book. It's so well written. It was a really great choice for the group book, and I would absolutely love to discuss it with Aoife and Leanne and also some of the other people who've taken part in the readathon. This feels like a good point to kind of wrap this part of the vlog up and keep going for the rest of the month with a new one. I'm still reading Rachel English's A Letter Home. I'm on page 110 and it's really starting to kick into gear right now. So hopefully I'm going to get this one finished by the end of this week. You can go and check in at the end of the month as to whether or not I actually kept up with that. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.